In the last couple of examples, we were given a contingency table. Let's practice creating one based on information about a situation. So in this example, a study was conducted to test the effectiveness of two new drugs on migraine relief. 150 migraine sufferers took part in the study. Of 60 patients who took drug A, 50 said they had relief from their migraine. Of 50 patients who took drug B, 35 said they had relief from their migraine. Of 40 patients who got a placebo, 8 said they had relief from their migraine. Now recall that a contingency table is going to relate to two variables. So two things that are happening here. Well, if we look closely, what we have, first of all, is patients taking different drugs or placebos. So one of the variables would relate to what type of medicine that the patients were taking. So they could have been taking drug A, I'll put that into the table, drug B, or they could have been taking the placebo. And there's no reason to have a placebo unless you're blinding the study. So this was most likely a blind study. The other thing that the patients all were asked about was whether they had relief from their migraine. They were either saying they had relief, or if they said if they didn't have relief, that would be considered no relief. So the other categorical variable here would be relief from their pain or no relief. You would fall into one of two categories, or one of two options for that category. So let's take the information, now that we've kind of set up the beginning of the table, and let's plug it in with numbers. So starting with the first bullet, we have 60 patients who took drug A. Now, 60 is the total number of people who took drug A. So we would put that into the total column, the subtotal for drug A. It's not the total for the entire table. It would just be for who took drug A. So that would be in the drug A column. 50 said they had relief from the migraine. So we'd put 50 under the region of drug A related to relief from the migraine. And if we know that 50 had relief and there were 60 total, that means that 10 people, with subtraction, I find that 10 people had no relief. We could do something similar for drug B. 50 patients took drug B. That's the subtotal related to drug B. 35 had relief, so I put the 35 under the relief column. And 50 minus 35 is 15 people had no relief. Placebo patients. 40 patients got a placebo. That would be the subtotal. 8 said they had relief from their migraine, so I'll put 8 people had relief. If 40 people total took placebo, 8 people had relief, that means 32 people had no relief. All right, so let's do some totaling up. We had 150 migraine sufferers, so that our subtotals for drug A, drug B, and the placebo should add up to 150. And indeed they do. 60, 50, and 40 add up to 150. Now let's double check that with the relief and no relief to make sure I didn't make a mistake putting those in. If I do a subtotal for people who've had relief, I would add this up and get 93. 50, 35, and 8 is 93. For the people who had no relief, 10, 15, and 32 would be 57. And then let's double check if those people who had relief and no relief really are 150 people, or the total. 93 plus 57 does also give me 150. So I know I didn't make, it looks like, any calculation mistakes as I put those values into the table. So there's creating the table. Once we have the table, we can practice answering some questions related to it. We'll start with part A. What percentage of participants received a placebo and got relief from their migraines? So we're talking about the participants in the study. So that would be everyone. So start with all of them, 150 in the denominator. And we want to know who received a placebo and got relief from their migraine. That would be where the placebo overlaps with the relief column. So that would be 8 people. So 8 people out of 150. Now it says percent, so go ahead and divide and then shift the decimal, and that would be 5.3. And I'm always rounding at the first decimal point here when I do percents. That's what I also ask on it related to tests and on worksheets. But be aware that sometimes when you're working in the online homework system, it may ask you to round at a different level. Part B, what percent of the participants received drug A or got relief from their migraine, or means looking at the all of both. So all of the people who received drug A as well as all of the people who got relief. Now we want to be careful when we look at all that we do not include any overlap. So when I look at all here, drug A would be the people, 50 people and 10 people, so that's 60 people altogether. And then drug B, or not, sorry, got relief, so that was drug A, and then the other thing I'm looking at is got relief. That would be the first column. And notice 50 appears twice there, and we do not want to add 50 twice. So we're only going to add the 50, the 10, the 35, and the 8. Do not add 50 twice. When you're working with a column and a row, do not use subtitles because you'll get the 50 twice. So when I look at all of those people, the people who received drug A or got relief, that would be 50 plus 35 plus 8 plus 10. Just make sure you add each of those numbers once. That would be 103 people altogether. Out of, we're looking at all the participants, so 150. Doing the division and shifting the decimal to get a percent, we would get 68.7%. Again, I'm rounding there. So remember, or be careful to get all of both qualities and make sure you don't have any overlap. Part C, what percentage of the people who took drug A? Now notice we're now narrowing our search. We're only looking at the people who took drug A received relief from their migraine. So we're only investigating the people who took drug A. When we think about that, let me erase some notes here. When we look at just drug A, that would be this first row. Oop, let me try that again. I accidentally wasn't highlighting there. So if I look at the first row for drug A had 50 people and 10 people relief and no relief, but had a total of 60. So when I think about a percentage related to those people who took drug A, I'm only really looking at 60 people. And then what we want to know is the percent of those 60 who had relief from their migraine. So there were 50 people who had relief from their migraine out of 60 who took drug A. So 50 divided by 60, shift the decimal, gives you 83.3%. So 83.3% of those people who took drug A received relief from their migraine. And part D, what percent of the people who took a placebo received relief from their migraine? So now we're looking at just the people who took the placebo. So if I shift and only look at the people who were taking the placebo, that would be 40 people, and those people who received relief were 8 of those 40. So this would be 8 out of 40. 8 divided by 40 comes out, without having to round, to exactly 20%. What we calculated on this page were percents related to this scenario. Remember, one of the things you can do with percents created from data is you can also use those to estimate probabilities. So this 20% of people who took a placebo who received relief, I could say that in terms of what is the probability that when you pick someone at random from the placebo group, that they had their migraine or got relief from their migraine. So that would be 20% of people from the placebo group got relief from their migraine. So you use this percent calculated from data to approximate a likelihood or a probability.